Hi guys, good afternoon. Right, and welcome, of course. Today I want to do a tutorial on SQL Server. Okay, or more like start to learn SQL from beginning to end. But the flavor of SQL I'm going to look at is Microsoft version, which is one of the most popular one out there, but you can easily port the knowledge that you build up in Microsoft SQL Server over to generic SQL servers such as Oracle's, Teradata, and any kind of MySQL server, open source servers as well. But essentially, there's two parts to SQL Server, okay, or learning SQL, and you must be aware of both parts. Okay, there's the server part of the SQL Server, of SQL, I should say, and then there is the language itself. So SQL is the language, and then you've got the server part to actually run your code. Okay, SQL is a language. Okay, server is a computer software that runs and hosts the database. Okay, and then each company has its own version of SQL language implementation. Okay, so Microsoft have got something called T-SQL as the language. Oracle, for example, have SQL, and of course other variations of the SQL language. So why T-SQL is known as T-SQL? Well, it stands for Transact SQL. Okay, so let me dig into a bit of history around this. So Transact SQL. Transact essentially means it's a transaction-based SQL, and what that will touch on later on means is everything in the code is done in batches. Okay, so you could submit something, a piece of code, and that code will run under a transaction, as it's known as. Okay, we'll touch on transactions later on, but all you need to know is that's what it stands for, Transact SQL. And this is Microsoft's implementation of the SQL query language for SQL Server, I should say. Now, in terms of how do you pronounce SQL, as you probably know, you could pronounce it S-E-Q-U-E-L, SQL, as in a sequel of the Terminator film, so SQL. Or you might also hear it pronounced as S-Q-L, separate letters. Okay, and the T-SQL language is essentially to extract data from a database, specifically I should say a SQL Server database. It's also to modify the data held within the database. Okay, now the SQL Server T-SQL is based on, of course, a standard SQL agreement, which is the American National Standards Institute, which is ANSI. But Microsoft, of course, has added its own functionality and enhancements to the T-SQL language, the original SQL language. And essentially, I would say these changes should make T-SQL very versatile and a very powerful language.